By midnight, 4 of Ethan's men would be unconscious in a hotel ballroom, and nobody would ever be able to explain how. Nathan would spend the rest of his life trying to answer one question: why did his father's baseball cap matter more than his mother's bare scalp? Because for 11 seconds, nobody in that conservatory was looking at the bride. They were looking at the groom's father, 61 years old, silver-haired, dabbing his forehead like a man who'd just been caught in a lie he'd told for 25 years. Princess didn't know that yet. She thought she'd cornered a frightened old accountant and his sick wife. She had the wig in one hand. She reached for the cap with the other. If you are new here, subscribe. 3 weeks earlier, Michael had told his wife something she didn't want to hear. Our son's fiancé clears a room the way I used to. Bright had laughed it off. Old habits, she said. You see ghosts in every doorway now. She stopped laughing the night she found the syndicate file with her own maiden name in it. What happened at the altar wasn't a wedding interrupted. It was a trap closing. And the 2 people everyone in that ballroom pitied were the only ones in the building who weren't afraid. The lights died all at once, and for half a second, the ballroom held its breath. Then the screaming started. Michael already had his eyes closed before the blackout hit. A habit 25 years deep, older than his marriage, older than Nathan. In the dark, he felt Bright's hand find his elbow. 2 quick squeezes. Go. The gas came next, hissing down through the floral rigging Simon had installed, disguised as humidity misters. Sweet, almost pleasant. The nearest guests would wake up in an hour with nothing but a headache and a story about fainting from the heat. Michael reached up and pressed the stem of his boutonniere. The thermal contact lenses bloomed to life behind his eyelids, painting the world in cold blue and hot orange. 3 heat signatures moved toward the head table, weapons drawn, confused by the sudden dark. He opened his eyes. The first man never saw him coming. Michael's hand closed around the syndicate soldier's wrist before the man registered a shape in the blackness, and he used the man's own momentum to drive his head into the corner of the cake table. Sheet cake and a body went down together, silent. Bright was already 3 feet to his left, moving the way she used to move before he'd talked her into curtains and casseroles and a quiet street in Winnetka. She caught the second man across the throat with her forearm, rode him to the floor, and had his sidearm in her hand before his knees buckled. 2 down, she whispered. 3, Michael said, stepping over the man at his feet. The third soldier panicked, firing blind into the dark, a mistake, because the muzzle flash lit his own face for exactly the amount of time Michael needed. Michael closed the distance in 4 strides and put him down with the flat of his palm against the base of the skull. Not lethal, not yet. There'd be time for that later, if it came to it. Somewhere near the entrance, Michael heard Nathan's voice, high and frightened, calling for his mother, calling for him. Bright touched his arm in the dark. He's going to ask questions. I know. He's going to hate us for the answers. Michael knelt, stripped a compact pistol from the unconscious guard's holster, and pressed it into his own waistband. The first weapon he'd carried in 2 decades. It felt exactly the same as it always had. That frightened him more than anything Princess had done tonight. Then he'll hate us alive, Michael said, instead of loving us dead. The gas was clearing. Somewhere above them, a second team was already cutting through the loading dock doors. 3 weeks before the wedding, Michael sat across the dinner table, pretending to butter a roll while he watched Princess work the room. She did it without seeming to do it. A glance at the front door, a glance at the kitchen pass-through, a beat too long checking the sightlines from her chair to every exit in the house. Most people would have called it nerves. Michael called it tradecraft. He'd taught 100 agents to do exactly what she was doing, and none of them had ever done it that smoothly on the first try. You're staring at her, Bright said later, drying a wine glass at the sink. She cleared the room before she sat down, Michael said, twice. She's meeting her future in-laws. People get nervous. Nervous people watch the person talking to them. She was watching the windows. Bright set the glass down harder than she needed to. 25 years of retirement had not erased the part of her that still noticed when a glass was set down harder than it needed to be. "You're seeing ghosts, Michael." Maybe. He wasn't seeing ghosts. He was seeing his own reflection 20 years younger, and it terrified him. He waited until Princess left the wine glass by the sink, before she and Nathan said their goodnights, and he wrapped it in a dish towel like it was made of glass ash, rather than crystal. Simon still owed him favors from 3 continents and 2 fake funerals. Running a print off a wine glass through an old contact at Interpol cost him one of them. The file came back 4 days later, and Michael read it standing in his garage at 2 in the morning, so Bright wouldn't hear him pacing. Her name wasn't Princess. It hadn't been Princess in 11 years. Before that, it had been 3 other names across 3 other countries, each one attached to a body count Michael didn't let himself finish reading. Her last confirmed handler was a man named Ethan Cole, formerly of a private security contractor that didn't officially exist anymore, currently of a syndicate that very much did. The target line at the bottom of the file was the part that stopped his heart. Asset believed to be married to female operative, Ghost Orchid, retired, whereabouts unknown for 25 years. Secondary target, her spouse. Call sign, locksmith. Michael hadn't heard either name spoken aloud since the administration before the one before this one. He drove to Bright's sister's house that night under the excuse of borrowing a ladder, and told his wife, standing in a stranger's garage at 3 in the morning, that their son was engaged to a woman sent to find them. Bright didn't cry. She didn't yell. She asked one question. "Does she know Nathan's just collateral?" "I don't think she cares," Michael said. Bright picked up the ladder they didn't need. "Then neither will I." Simon's storage unit hadn't changed in 10 years. Same rusted roll door in the same anonymous complex off Route 41. Same smell of gun oil and old cardboard. He opened it at Michael's knock without asking who it was, which told Michael he'd been expected for days. "You look terrible," Simon said. He was 71 now, thinner than he used to be, but his hands were as steady as ever, pouring 3 fingers of bourbon into a jar that used to hold nails. "Ethan Cole," Michael said, and watched Simon's face do something complicated. "You could have just called. Would you have answered?" "No." Simon handed him the jar. "Sit down. Tell me how bad." Michael told him. The file, the wine glass, the target line with 2 call signs nobody living was supposed to remember. Bright sat on an overturned crate with her arms folded, saying nothing, because she'd already said everything she had to say back in her sister's garage. "You could cancel the wedding," Simon offered, though he said it like a man who already knew the answer. "And do what? Vanish again? Nathan spent his whole life not knowing who we are. I'm not going to hand him a lie about why his wedding got cancelled too." Michael turned the jar in his hands. "Ethan wants us to run. Running is what he understands. If we run, he follows, and Nathan spends the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, without knowing why. So what? You fight a syndicate hit squad in a ballroom full of caterers. I fight them on ground I control." Michael pulled the venue schematics from his jacket, already marked in pencil. The Drake's conservatory has one structural weak point in the glass roof. Original construction, patched twice. The kitchen runs 3 phases of power off a single junction box I can access from the loading dock. And the florist Nathan hired subcontracts through a supplier I've used before. Simon exhaled, long and slow, the sound of a man doing math he didn't want to do. "You want to turn a wedding into a kill box. I want to turn a wedding into a room only Bright, and I know how to survive." They worked until 4 in the morning. Simon rigged the floral centerpieces with concealed compressed gas lines, non-lethal, disguised as humidity control for the orchids. Bright mapped the catering carts, noting which ones could be repositioned as cover, which utensils could be more than utensils. Michael handled the failsafe himself. The wig, the cap, a magnetic clasp system wired to the building's breaker panel, so that removing either would trip a blackout and flood the room with gas before anyone understood why. "If this goes wrong," Simon said, loading the last case into Michael's car, "there's no clean version of this story. Guests will remember guns at a wedding." "There's no clean version of any of this," Michael said. "There hasn't been for 25 years. I just get to choose who walks out of the room. If you are still listening, Tell me where you are watching from in the comments right now. The gas was thinning by the time Michael found Nathan, and what he saw stopped him cold. His son, on his knees near the overturned dessert table, not hurt, but staring at his father's hands like he'd never seen them before. Because he hadn't. Not like this. "Dad!" Nathan's voice cracked on the word. "Dad, what did you just do to that man?" There wasn't time for gentleness. Michael pulled him up by the arm. "Service elevator, now. Talk later." They moved fast through the smoke-hazed ballroom, Bright covering the rear, walking backward with the sidearm she'd taken low and steady, the way she used to carry a wine glass at a diplomatic reception with a man's life riding on how casual her wrist looked. Old muscle, waking up all at once after 25 years asleep. The service corridor was narrow, lit by a single emergency bulb. Nathan planted his feet the second they were through the door. "No, stop. I want an answer right now, or I'm not moving another step." Bright glanced at Michael. He gave the smallest nod, the same one he used to give her before deciding a source was worth the risk. "Your mother and I aren't who you think we are," Michael said. "We were operatives, intelligence, private contract, the kind of work that doesn't exist on paper. We got out 25 years ago, before you were born. We built you a life with none of that in it, on purpose." "That's," Nathan laughed, one short, disbelieving syllable. "That's insane. You coach my little league games. You fall asleep during golf." "I'm very good at falling asleep during golf," Michael said. "It's a skill." Bright didn't laugh. She crossed to her son, took his face in both hands, the way she had when he was small and frightened of thunder, and said the only thing that mattered. "Princess isn't who you think she is either. She's here for us, not you. But she'll use you to get to us if she has to, and I am not going to let that happen." She pulled the compact pistol from her waistband, a mirror of the one Michael had taken upstairs, and pressed it into Nathan's hands before he could refuse it. "I don't know how to use this. You won't need to know much. Point, don't think, pull." Bright closed his fingers around the grip. "I wish I had a gentler truth for you. I don't have one. I only have a true one." Somewhere above them, a muffled boom rattled the stairwell, the loading dock doors, giving way under something heavier than a crowbar. Michael looked at his son's white knuckles around the pistol grip, and for the first time in 25 years, he let himself feel something other than fear about what Nathan was about to learn. "That's Ethan," Michael said. "Stay close, stay low, and whatever you see in the next 10 minutes, it's still us." The loading dock doors didn't just give way. They came off the hinges entirely, torn loose by something that sounded less like a crowbar and more like a small explosive charge, set with precision. Michael felt the concussion through the concrete under his shoes before he heard it. "That's shaped charge," Bright said. "Not brute force." "He brought a breacher. He brought a team," Michael said. Ethan Cole walked in first, which told Michael everything he needed to know about the man's confidence. No rush, no crouch, no weapon raised. Just a gray-haired man in a dark suit, stepping over the wreckage of a door, like he was arriving fashionably late to a party he already owned. 6 men fanned out behind him, night vision goggles pushed up on their foreheads now that the ballroom lights were flickering back to half power, weapons trained low and ready. "Locksmith," Ethan called into the corridor, his voice pleasant, almost warm. "Ghost Orchid, it's been a long time." Michael pulled Nathan back against the wall by his collar, out of sightline. Bright pressed herself flat on the opposite side, pistol low. "You could have knocked," Michael called back. Ethan laughed, genuinely, like he'd missed this. "Princess said you'd gone soft. Golf, was it? Little League?" He gestured, and 2 of his men peeled off toward the ballroom's east exit, 2 more toward the west, boxing the space in with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this before, in other countries, to other families. "I told her nobody goes soft after what you 2 did in Basra. I told her you were just waiting. Waiting for what? For a good enough reason to come back." Ethan checked his watch, unhurried. "I have 200 wedding guests currently sedated in a ballroom, Michael. I have a bride upstairs holding a hairpiece, and very confused why the science didn't work. And I have your son 20 feet away from me right now, don't I? Nathan's breath caught. Michael's hand tightened on his shoulder. Stay still. Here's what happens next, Ethan continued, walking closer, unarmed hands open at his sides, a showman's gesture. You and Bright come out. You give me the actual keys, not whatever nonsense is stitched into that cap. And your boy goes back to his honeymoon with a story about a blackout and a fire drill. Or you make me come get you. And I promise you, the story he tells for the rest of his life is a much worse one. Michael looked at Bright. Bright looked at the pistol in her hand, then at the two men closing on the east exit, then back at her husband. He's stalling, she mouthed. Simon. Michael nodded once. Simon's rigged catering carts were still 3 rooms away, unarmed, useless unless someone reached the kitchen. And reaching the kitchen meant walking directly past 4 of Ethan's men. Give us a minute, Michael called out, buying time he didn't have. We're deciding whether our son gets to keep believing in us. Take 2, Ethan said generously, and checked his watch again. I've got all night, locksmith. You're the ones running out of exits. Michael pulled Bright and Nathan 2 doors deeper into the service corridor, out of Ethan's sightline, and laid it out fast, in the clipped shorthand he hadn't used in 25 years but that came back like a language he'd never actually forgotten. Kitchens through that door. Simon's rigs are on the 3rd and 5th carts. Propane lines, rerouted, triggered by the red tape marks. We draw Ethan's men in, we blow the carts. We use the smoke and confusion to break for the conservatory before his second wave regroups. And Nathan? Bright asked. Behind the walk-in cooler. Doors steel. It locks from the inside. Michael crouched to his son's eye level. You stay there no matter what you hear, no matter how long it takes. Dad, no matter what you hear, Michael said again, and something in his voice made Nathan nod instead of argue. They moved. The kitchen was a wreck of overturned prep tables, where the catering staff had fled at the first blackout, stainless steel gleaming under emergency lighting, and Bright peeled off toward the walk-in with Nathan, while Michael took position behind the 3rd cart, exactly where Simon had marked it. 2 of Ethan's men came through the swinging doors first, sweeping the room with rifles, moving in the disciplined bounding pattern of people who'd trained together. Michael let them clear half the room before he moved. He came up from behind the cart low and fast, drove his shoulder into the nearest man's ribs, and used the momentum to slam him into a hanging rack of copper pots that came down in a crash of noise, loud enough to mask the second man's shout of alarm. The second man swung his rifle around, but Bright was already there, stepping out from behind the cooler door with the flat economy of someone who'd done this in worse kitchens, in worse countries, and put him down with 2 fast strikes before he could pull the trigger. Cart's hot, Michael said, yanking the red tape free from the 3rd cart's propane line. Get clear. They didn't run so much as walk briskly, which was its own kind of terrifying. 25 years of training telling them that running looked like fear, and fear got you killed. Behind them, 4 more of Ethan's men poured through the doors, and Michael twisted the valve open before ducking behind the steel prep table. The cart went up in a controlled fireball, more light and noise than damage, exactly as Simon had designed it. Enough to blind night vision optics and buy panic, not enough to bring down the ceiling. The concussion rattled every pan in the kitchen. 2 of Ethan's men went down from the shockwave alone. The other 2 stumbled back through the smoke, disoriented, weapons firing blind into racks of dinnerware. Now, Bright said, and Michael was already moving, sweeping the legs from the nearest stumbling guard and driving an elbow into the second before either man's vision cleared enough to aim. Through the smoke and the ringing in his ears, Michael heard Ethan's voice from the corridor, no longer amused. Conservatory, Ethan barked to whoever remained. Get the boy. Now. Michael's blood went cold. He looked back toward the walk-in cooler and found the door standing open and no one inside. The walk-in cooler stood open, empty, and for one horrible second, Michael's mind supplied every worst possibility at once. Then he saw the note, Bright's handwriting, scrawled on a napkin and stuck to the door with a butter knife. Moving him myself. Conservatory's a trap. Meet you there. Of course. Bright had read Ethan's stalling the same way Michael had, 3 steps ahead as always, and decided waiting for permission would cost them time they didn't have. Michael was wrong about one thing. She hadn't made it. He came through the conservatory's side entrance to find the glass-walled room lit gold by the ballroom's spillover chandeliers, orchids, and untouched wedding cake still standing serene amid the chaos elsewhere in the hotel, and Princess standing in the center of it, Nathan in front of her, her forearm locked across his throat and a pistol pressed to his temple. Bright stood 10 feet away, hands open, weapon lowered to the marble floor at her feet. She'd gotten Nathan this far, and no farther. "Drop it," Princess said, and Michael realized she meant him. She'd heard him enter, hadn't even turned. "The rest of the way, old man. I know you're carrying." Michael set the pistol down slowly, sliding it across the floor with his foot. "You people," Princess said, and for the first time all night, something raw came through her voice, something that wasn't performance. 25 years. Do you know what it took to find you? Do you know what Ethan did to the last 3 people who failed to? I know exactly what he does, Michael said. I trained under men who did worse. Then you know I don't have a choice here. Her arm tightened fractionally across Nathan's throat, and he made a small, strangled sound that took 10 years off Michael's life. The real keys. Not the cap, not the wig. Whatever you actually did with the drive. Give it to me, and I let your son go home and pretend his parents are boring. There is no drive, Bright said quietly. There never was. We handed everything over the day we walked out. That's why they let us walk. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me, Bright said. You have to decide, right now, whether you're willing to put a bullet in a groom on his wedding night for a rumor Ethan's been chasing for 2 decades, because he can't accept that some people actually get to leave. Something flickered across Princess's face, the first crack Michael had seen in her all night. Not doubt about the drive, doubt about Ethan. Nathan's eyes found his father's over the barrel of the gun, wide and terrified, and, underneath it, something else. Trust, maybe, still holding on by a thread. Michael took one slow step forward, hands still raised. You're not a killer, Michael said. I've watched a lot of killers work tonight. You're not one of them. You're someone who got recruited young and told this was the only door out. I know that story better than anyone alive. Stop talking. There's another door, Michael said. There's always another door. I found it. So can you. Above them, through the glass roof, a shadow moved across the moonlight. Small, deliberate, climbing. Bright dropped through the conservatory's glass roof exactly 4 seconds later, and the sound of it, a controlled shatter, more precise than violent, glass raining down in a ring around her rather than on top of anyone, bought Michael the only opening he was going to get. Princess spun toward the noise on instinct, her arm loosening a fraction around Nathan's throat, and Michael closed the distance in 3 strides. He didn't go for the gun. He went for Nathan, wrenching his son sideways and down, out of the line of fire, the 2 of them hitting the marble floor hard beside an overturned centerpiece. Bright landed in a crouch amid the broken glass, already moving, and drove into Princess before the younger woman could reacquire her target. The gun went off once, wild, the round burying itself somewhere in the orchid trellis, and then it was just the 2 of them. A fight with no wasted motion, no shouting. The brutal, quiet economy of 2 professionals who both knew exactly how little time a fight like this should take. Princess was younger, faster. Bright was 25 years out of practice, and fighting like she'd never left. Michael didn't watch. He couldn't. Ethan's voice reached the conservatory doorway a half-second later, flanked by his last 2 men, and Michael understood with total clarity that this was the only part of the night that had ever really mattered. Not the keys, not the drive, not the syndicate's decades-old grudge, but this exact moment, 3 feet from his son, deciding whether Ethan Cole walked out of this hotel. Enough, Ethan said, raising his weapon toward Michael. This ends now. You're right, Michael said. It does. He'd palmed a shard of the broken glass roof without thinking about it. Old reflex. The kind that didn't need permission from the frightened part of his brain that just wanted to hold his son and never let go. And he closed the last of the distance before Ethan's men could bring their rifles fully to bear. It was over, faster than it should have been possible to be over. Ethan's weapon clattered to the marble. Michael's hands, when it was done, were shaking in a way they hadn't shaken in 25 years. Behind him, Bright drove Princess to the floor with a final, decisive strike, pinning her there, both of them breathing hard amid the broken glass and scattered orchid petals. "Stand down," Bright said, low, almost gentle. "It's over. Ethan's finished. There's nothing left to fight for." Princess didn't move, didn't fight. She just lay there against the cold marble, staring up at the shattered roof and the real night sky beyond it, like a woman seeing the outside world for the first time in years. Nathan pulled himself upright against an overturned chair, staring at his parents, his father standing over a beaten syndicate boss, his mother pinning an assassin to the floor of his own wedding, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left in him to say. Sirens were still distant when Simon's reinforced extraction vehicle rolled up to the hotel's rear entrance. Headlights off, exactly on schedule. Some habits, Michael thought, never needed updating. The conservatory had gone quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet after violence. Ethan zip-tied and unconscious near the shattered orchid trellis, his last two men disarmed and secured beside him, Princess sitting against an overturned chair with her hands bound loosely in front of her, staring at nothing. "You could have killed me," she said finally, not looking up. "Both of you. Easily." "We know," Bright said. "Why didn't you?" Michael crouched down to her level, the way he had years ago with sources who needed to believe there was a way out that didn't end in a body bag. "Because somebody should have asked you that same question a long time ago. Nobody did. That's not your fault. What you do in the next 5 minutes, that part is." She didn't answer, but when Simon's men came through to collect Ethan's crew, she didn't fight them either, and something in the set of her shoulders looked less like defeat and more like the first breath of a woman finally putting something down. Nathan hadn't spoken since the conservatory. He sat on an overturned chair with a blanket someone had draped over his tuxedo, watching his parents move through the wreckage of his wedding with a competence that still didn't fit the two people who'd raised him. Michael finally sat down across from him, out of things to say that weren't the truth. "I taught you to ride a bike in that empty lot on Fairview because it was the only place I was sure nobody was watching us," Michael said. "I coached your Little League team because it let me check every parent in the stands for the first 3 seasons. I fell asleep during golf because pretending to be boring was the hardest, most important job I've ever done, and I did it for you." Nathan's jaw worked for a long moment. "You lied to me for 30 years. Yes. You almost got me killed tonight. Yes." Michael didn't look away. "And I would build the exact same lie again tomorrow, if it meant one more year of you not knowing what your mother and I are capable of." Bright knelt beside her son and took his hand, the same hand she'd pressed a pistol into an hour earlier. "We're done hiding," she said. "Whatever happens next, you get to decide how much of us you want. But you'll never again wonder if we're telling you the truth." Nathan looked at his mother, then his father, then at Simon, standing patient by the loading dock with the engine running. "Where does the truth take us now?" he asked. Michael stood, offered his son a hand, and pulled him to his feet. "Somewhere Ethan's friends will never think to look," Michael said. "Get in the car. I'll tell you everything on the way." Behind them, the wedding guests were beginning to stir from the gas, groggy and disoriented, already composing the story they'd tell for the rest of their lives about the night the lights went out at Nathan's wedding. None of them would ever know how close it had come to being the last night any of them saw. The car pulled away from the Drake into the dark Chicago streets. 3 generations of a family, finally fully known to one another, disappearing into a life with no more locked doors.